with the current events now happening in Israel, in the land of Israel, and of course the PLO, the West Bank, it's been all over the news the past week. I'll be delinquent if I'm not going to address that topic, since it's in everybody's mind, and I would say it's timely. Okay. Recalling the messages given here, I gave a message last January 16, just one day, 4 months ago, on a title on the subject, God's Unfailing Promises to Israel. That was the topic I gave just exactly 4 months ago. And I'd like to be able to give a background. That message gave you a good, solid background on Israel from a biblical perspective. But today, I'd like to reinforce that message further by talking a little bit more about the history, its present, and its future concerning Israel. Thus, the title of this sermon is Understanding Israel, its History and Prophecy. So it will be good for you to listen carefully and on this topic. Now, just a little bit of preview on its history. What are the borders that were given to our great father Abraham about the descendants of Israel? What is their territory? I'd like us to open to Genesis chapter 15, verses 18 to 21. Genesis chapter 15, 18 to 21. 18. You can flash the first slide. Okay. That land area was promised to Abraham. Okay. A reading from the Bible. Since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations shall be blessed in him. In verse 19, for I have known him, in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they may keep the way of Yahweh, to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord or Yahweh may bring to Abraham what he had spoken to him. Now this is the land of Israel that God has promised to him. Okay, you would see that it, using the red lines, it goes to Mesopotamia, and that's actually the Middle East. Okay. Continuing here to continue reading here, and Yahweh said, because the outcry against Sodom, of course this is about Sodom going in 21, I'll go down, okay, and looking at this, it goes to the Euphrates River, okay, the curved lines at the right describes the Euphrates River, and down to the Mediterranean Sea, and includes the Sinai Desert and all of that. We know that to be the land of, or the Middle East, which is the land of the Arabs. Now, you will say, why are the Arabs included here? Well, the Arabs are also descendants of Abraham through Ishmael. Okay? So, in modern day, those are, okay, the along the Mesopotamia River is Iraq. Okay? And then, north there is Syria, and then, of course, we have Israel, and Jordan is in this desert. Saudi Arabia occupies most of this Arabian desert. So those are some of the biggest nation of the Middle East. Okay. Now, let's continue here with, okay, that is was what originally was given to Abraham. Abraham was told to go up the high mountain, and he said, as far as you can see. But of course, his eyes could only see, I think, 2 or 3 kilometers or 4. But he did not see exactly. But God had to describe to him what the boundaries are. And that is given to the descendants of Abraham. Now, centuries later, not centuries, but many years later, that territory was even expanded. Okay, it was expanded. We are going to see Genesis chapter 22, when that territory was further expanded, starting verses 15. Okay, starting in verse 15, then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time out of heaven. The second time, second appearance, and said, by myself, this is after he demonstrated his willingness to sacrifice his only son Isaac. He said, by myself I've sworn, says Yahweh, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son. In blessing I will bless you, and in multiplying I will multiply your descendants. Descendants. Okay? Descendants. As the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your descendants shall possess the gates of their enemies. Okay? Gates of their enemies. In your seed shall all nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So, we are going to look into the next slide. What do you mean, gates of your enemies? Okay, gates of your enemies, one of them is the Suez Canal. Why is it gate? Because you have no other way to pass. Otherwise, it's a very long way. Actually, this is Egypt. Okay, where has been made. It's a man-made canal, made under the supervision of the British at the time, and that's a long way to the South African continent. Otherwise, you'll have to go, but now you have to do a shortcut from Mediterranean Sea, go through this Gulf of the Suez, and then go to the Indian Ocean. It's a very good shortcut. But that was under the control of the British Empire many years ago. Okay? That's the Suez Canal. Now, gates of your enemies, you'll possess it. Yeah. Okay, that's the Suez Canal with the ships going through. And you could see it. My recent incident yan, just about a month ago, my big boat blocked the way, and of course it took many days for them to remove it. But that's the Suez Canal. It's very long. Okay, it's a long passage, and that was built under the British rule at the time over Egypt. Now that's that was a promise that was fulfilled. Okay, when God said you will have, or you will possess the gates of your enemies. And they had control. And they can control it. They can stop the shipping there. And a big volume of shipping, I think 70% of shipping passed through that, rather than rounding up the whole South African continent. Now, another gates of your enemies that has been promised and under the control of the descendants of Abraham is the Panama Canal. Now here, rather than going around the South American continent, kanina sabi ko African, iba na naman to, American continent, they cut through the Panama Canal. Okay, it is okay, that is the Panama Canal. Now you'll see that there are blocks or compartments. Why? Because this canal has to go up the mountain and then down to the sea again. So they developed the technology of making locks. So the boat will go to the first lock, they'll pump water up, okay, shut the back until it levels with the second lock, open the gate, move forward, shut, and then pump more water, and then open the gate, and so on until it goes down to the other side of the mountain. Mahaba yan. That is one of the great engineering marvels of mankind. Letting a big ships pass through the mountains of Panama from sea to the other side of the sea, that is what God allowed humans to develop. So you could see here a ship passing through the Panama Canal. It was built by the British, but now it's lost. Okay, it's no longer in their hands. Now these are, if the descendants of Abraham would cross this, they would have full control of the gates of their enemies. Now there is another one that we mentioned, the Singapore Strait. Okay, Singapore is a city-state, and most of the shipping goes through that, and it's a choke point. Actually, look at the ships. It's a choke point. They could cross it, and 70% of the petroleum products and shipping pass through that. This is also in Asia. And so, look at all the ships there, lighted. Now, this is that strait. Okay, they can control that by cannons on its side, firepower, and so they control the shipping. So everyone can see or not. Can you see? You can move to a better place. Okay. So these are some of these images of when we are talking about the gates of their enemies. And these have been fulfilled to the letter. And of course, we also have the West Philippine Sea. That's also a gateway between China and the Philippines. We can block that, but it's too big, and nobody can claim. The Chinese said it's ours, the Philippines said it's ours, but Philippines cannot do anything. And there are many other places here. But that shows you the fulfillment of that promise. Now, the fact is, Bible prophecy has been fulfilled to the letter. It has been done, and we could see that while this was promised to Abraham when he was alive, about 3,000 years ago, we have seen the reality in our time. Okay, so I think that's what we have prepared for now. What we would like to discuss at this time is itong gulo, Israel, and this modern conflict in the Middle East. Okay, I was just showing you what has been promised, it was fulfilled. Now, what will happen to the Middle East? Now, we have to identify the contenders here, Israel, and of course the PLO, or the Palestinian Liberation Organization. First of all, we need to understand the PLO. We have been hearing PLO, but do you know where it came from? When was it organized? May PLO na ba sa panahon ng New Testament? No. There was no such thing as PLO. This is a modern problem. Okay? Now, this PLO, which is claiming part of the territory of Israel, were actually Arab people. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah. Let's look at this. There is the West Bank. The dark part is the West Bank. And then there's another dark part here. This is Gaza, West Bank, PLO, Gaza, and this orange is Israel. Okay, the rest are, of course, we have shown that earlier. That's Jordan, Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia here. That's Egypt. Now, this part of Israel is very small. It's just the size of New Jersey. Very small, very small. And it is just 1/50th of the size of all the Arab nations around. Maliit masyado. In fact, it is just 15 kilometers wide and I think about over 100 kilometers long. So more or less similar to the area of Davao, but fully developed. Okay, fully developed. So the West Bank is that. Now you're wondering, why is it called the West Bank? West Kaliwa Bank. Why? Well, why it is called the West Bank is the reference here is the Jordan River. Okay, this the the Sea of Galilee, Dead Sea. That is what the Israelites crossed. So this is the reference point. So west is the West Bank. Okay, and so that's part of Israelite territory. That's called West Bank, and that is occupied by what we call the PLO. Okay. Now, how did it develop? Bakit may PLO dyan, or what we say, Arabs? They're not Israelites, they're Arabs. The very starting point here is you have to go back to centuries ago in about 136 AD. Tagal na yan. More than almost 2,000 years ago when Roman Emperor Hadrian punished the Israelites for the rebellion. And in his anger, of course, I have written on this, he banished their culture, removed their Sabbath, burned all literature, killed their wise men, destroyed their calendar, walang iniwan, and in effect, they were driven out from Israel. And that started what is called in the Greek as the diaspora, the scattering of the Jews out of Israel. So, when the Jews left their homeland, actually it is the second time. Bakit sinabi kong second time? The first was when the Assyrian king, actually there are two waves, the Assyrian king transported them away, and the latest was about 70 years later when Babylon and the Nebuchadnezzar transported the Jews, the two tribes, Israelites, the Jews. The first was the 10 tribes. They were scattered into northern Europe, and they are called the lost 10 tribes. And the second wave was when Judah together with the Levites, because they always served the temple, and a little bit of Levi and Simeon, and the Reubenites joined, and they were transported out of this land to Babylon. So actually there were waves, and they were allowed to come back during the time of Cyrus the Great. King Cyrus allowed them to go back, and that account of their going back to rebuild the temple and the walls of Jerusalem is written in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. You have to put all of this together. So they were back in their land during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. And they became okay, and they rebuilt the second temple. But then General Titus of the Roman army burnt this temple in 70 AD. You have to remember these things. And most of the things there had been carted out, and that was okay. The Jews are a tenacious people. Most of them stayed on, but about 100 years later, and actually less than 100, in 135 to 37 AD, Roman Emperor Hadrian at the time destroyed Israel for good. Sabi for good. Kasi talagang winasak niya lahat. They have no more temple, but he got rid of their priesthood, their worship, everything. It's just good that by that time, you might be asking me, wala sa topic to, no? You might be asking me, how come if Hadrian destroyed completely the Jewish culture, how come that we still have the Bible? How come? How come that we still have the New Testament writings of the apostles? The story of this is found in the article 25 Irrefutable Reasons Why the New Testament was not written in Greek. I want to challenge you to read that. Why the 25 reasons why the New Testament was not written in Greek, but actually Aramaic. Yan ang totoo. And before this happened, before the persecutions happened, and before Hadrian eliminated the Jews, the 12 apostles were already out. They have been preaching in the foreign lands, and they got murdered. They did not come back to Israel anymore. And they took with them the writings. After Pentecost, and they were filled with the Holy Spirit, the apostles were inspired to write. Matthew wrote his experiences with the Messiah. Mark, he was not an apostle, but he was I would say, observer. He wrote. And Luke was a Greek, educated Greek, and he was a Grecian convert. He wrote, and John wrote. So this wrote their individual gospels. And since there were at the time priests who were also converted on the day of Pentecost, and Masoretes, and these Masoretes, their job was to write, and they made multiple copies of the gospel accounts. And so when they had made enough of these gospel accounts, the apostles stayed in Jerusalem, waited until the Jerusalem conference, and soon after that, they began to go, bringing with them the writings, multiple copies of writings, and distributed that to the lands outside of Jerusalem. This is not part of the story, but I'm giving you a little bit of background so you'll be able to tie up the events of history. So these were brought to Parthia, the shores of the Black Sea, where the children of Israel were settled at the time, where Peter addressed his letters. Okay? Now, it's not here, but I'd like you to open to Peter. And let's see where he wrote these letters. Okay? Because, Peter did not go out. He was in Jerusalem together with the half-brother of Yeshua, James. So here, 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. I'd like you to notice this. Peter, an apostle of Yeshua Messiah, okay, 1 Peter 1, verse 1, verse, to the pilgrims of the dispersion. Pilgrims, why? They were not residents in those places. They're strangers in those places. In Pontus, in Galatia, now this Galatia, there are two Galatians. We have the upper Galatia, this is the lower, lower Galatia is where Paul preached, but this refers to the upper Galatia, where the apostles brought the gospel. Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. These are regions in the Black Sea. Okay? Those are places in Turkey right now. Elect according to the foreknowledge of Yahweh the Father, in sanctification of the Spirit, for obedience and the sprinkling of the blood of Yeshua Messiah. Grace and peace be multiplied. So this was addressed to those far places. Puntos ang layo yan. Okay? Upper Galatia is very far from Jerusalem. You have to cross the Mediterranean Sea, pass through continents and go there. That's very far. And this is the address of Peter. Now, you might be thinking, James? How about James? Open to James. Chapter 1. James chapter 1. In verse 1. James, a servant of Yahweh and of the Lord Yeshua Messiah, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. Wow. The 12 tribes were so distant. And this letter of James was all brought to them. They wrote in the language that these people understood. And that's Aramaic. Okay. Peter was not an educated man, or from the world standard, he wrote in Aramaic. It was sent to those people who understood Aramaic. How? Because even in the Babylonian captivity, they spoke Aramaic. And much of the writings of Daniel, the prophet, in Babylon was written in Aramaic. And so that was a familiar language. So I'm just placing some of these references, silent reference, to tie up all of this. Okay. So this answers the question, how come that the scriptures were not destroyed? The apostles brought them with them, the Hebrew writings, so that when Hadrian blotted out all Israelite literature, they were already safely out already into the hands of the 12 tribes of Israel. They were not destroyed. So that answers the question, if Hadrian completely destroyed everything of Jewish culture, wala na sana. And that was Hadrian who blotted out even the name of Israel. He said, this land is not Israel. And he asked, anong number ng kalaban ng mga Israelites? They said, mga Philistine. Okay, let's call this Palestina. And you'll be surprised that in our maps, and when I was going to school, until recently, in the map, we will see this as Palestina. It's not Israel. Okay? It was only in the Balfour Declaration that the name Israel was restored in 1917, over 100 years ago. Okay? Which was celebrated in 2017 in Britain and in Israel. And of course, even if it was already declared, and of course we know about the story of General Allenby. You have to go back to my writings about 12 Jerusalem facts that many people don't know. You have to read that. And we have to note that in 1947, Israel was not yet a full nation. And it was declared because they were helpless. They were scattered people. It was the United Nations which carved out a territory and said, this land will be Israel. Kaunti na lang. And actually, what we know today as Israel is actually Judah, one of the 12 tribes. The rest of Israel is scattered in Cappadocia and Pontus and many places scattered around the world. And this is just the tribe of Judah. Okay? So, you need to understand the perspective of history and how it all relates. Okay, now, in 1948, these people, Israel, were a nobody. It was the United Nations who declared it. Okay, you'll have a land, but Yes, a problem. Since Arabs were already there, it was also the United Nations which made a decree. Okay, Jerusalem, which should be here, ito. Kaya ganyan. Kasi this is Jerusalem. Okay, Jerusalem. Sorry, I did not bring my pointer. I have a laser pointer pero nakalimutan ko. It's somewhere. Anyway, that part there is Jerusalem, and it has to be divided. The eastern part is the Arab part, and this western part is Jerusalem belonging to the Jews. So, you need to understand these things. Okay? Yung part niyan, kaya nagganyan yan because that is Jerusalem there. Near Jericho, and south of it is Bethlehem. So, I want you to have a good perspective why that is so. And of course, the Gaza Strip is right here near the Mediterranean Sea. That also belongs to the PLO. Okay, PLO. Now, let's get back to our story. Now, the original Israelites were dispersed into the four winds, and since there were no occupants there, some of these Arabs around Jordan and a few others settled in the place of Israel. They settled. And since they said, this belongs to Palestine, walang Israel dito, kami. And so they settled there. Okay? And in others, they were squatters. They encroached the land. And so, let us understand when did this PLO, they were just scattered nomads in a desert land. Actually, Israel at the time was a desert land. And so they occupied that. And many of them were born there, generations of Philistines, or they call themselves Palestinians, were born there, but they are not Jews. They are not Israelites. Okay? Now, let us understand a little bit more. I'd like you to, just a moment. I'd like to read a little bit about Netanyahu's address to the people of Israel during the attacks the past week. Okay? Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu said, only 70 years ago, the Jews were taken to slaughter like sheep. Okay? Remember that Israel in 1947-48, June pa lang nag-umpisa. Okay? So it's about 70 years ago. She had no country, no army, and at that time, 7 Arab nations declared war on the small Jewish state only a few hours after its creation. So yan, the 7 Arab nations began to gang up on this newly declared infant nation. Egypt, Jordan, Syria, those 7 nations there, and backed up by Soviet armory, artillery. Okay. At that time, he said we were 650 Jews against the rest of the Arab world. 650 Jews. Netanyahu was tracing a little bit of their history. 70 years ago, 650 Jews, less than the population of Davao. Okay? Against the Arab world, and I said the proportion is 1:50. 1:50. In the 1-to-1, in the 1:2, it's not 1:10, 1:50. Talong-talo ang Israel. And at the time, they had no air force, they had no army. Wala. And he said, they were only brave people, the original settlers. The nations around them, of course, I mentioned already Egypt, with Lebanon and Syria on the north, Iraq on the east toward and then with Jordan, Egypt, Libya, Saudi Arabia, all attacked at the same time against that very small nation. And they had no place to go. Their only will was to survive. Okay? And when that land was given to them by the United Nations, it was 65% desert. Sand, no plants. 65% desert. Okay? When they started. And then they had another fight. The Arabs again attempted to fight them in 1973, I guess, and that was 35 years ago. We fought the three armies most powerful in the Middle East, and we swept them in 6 days. That's called the 6-Day War. Okay? And they again won. The Israelites won in that 6-day war. So, sandali. Now, you have to remember that the Arabs never stops. They don't stop. Okay. And last week, they again fought. Can you go to the next slide, please? There. All those marks are where the rockets of the PLO, especially headed by the Hamas, all fell. Because Israel is there, and of course this side is the PLO territory. So all of those, and you know how many rockets they fired? Yes, last night I was reading about 2,000 rockets. 2,000 rockets. And I knew that because that was the strategy being planned about 2 years ago. The Hamas said we can defeat Israel. How? We rain down rockets upon them. And the Iron Dome cannot defend. Kasi yung Iron Dome, ilan lang ma-intercept niya. Okay? They cannot defend, and then we will be able to defeat and completely destroy Israel. That was their strategy. And of course, Israel did not have much. I think some of you have seen footage when you saw flights, these streaks of light going up. At kung nag-brighten yun, yan, intercept yan ng Iron Dome missile. So pag nagputok sa taas, that has been intercepted. Ito, yan, from this Hamas rockets. And pag nagputok doon, that's the Iron Dome destroying the rockets. Okay? So, talagang matindi. And happily, out of the 2,000 rockets that has been made and rained upon Israel by the Hamas rebel forces, about 90% were intercepted by the Iron Dome. This Iron Dome, actually, itong mga Hamas rocket, they're cheap. I described this, I think, about 2 years ago. They get BI tube, iron pipe, BI, yung pinakabarato, 6-inch diameter, mga 2 dipa, load that with gunpowder, make a sumo there, and then put ailerons at the tail, fill it up, ignite it, boom! It will fly. Parang huitis. Okay? Ganun lang principle. So, those are all huitis. And they're very cheap compared to the Iron Dome missiles. The Iron Dome missiles are very sophisticated. They have GPS, okay, and they have sensors that can trace these rockets. It's like shooting a bullet with another bullet. Kaya mo yan? Paputok yung bala, tirahin mo rin yung bala, hindi kaya ng mata-mata, no human. But by electronic means, the Israelites were able to develop that. And so, all of those, those were intercepted by the Iron Dome. And 90% were successful. But out of 2,000 rockets, if it was 90% was intercepted by the Iron Dome, there would have been still 200 rockets that landed on Israel's soil. 200 rockets is not a joke. Some of them hit some buildings, but of course the Israelites have bomb shelters. Most of them have bomb shelters, especially new constructions. So very few had been damaged by this recent firefight. Okay, 200, and most of them landed in vacant territory. But thanks to the technology of Israel, they spent so much, yet they were kind of victorious. Okay, so that is what we have by way of account. And I continue here with what Netanyahu said to his fellow citizens, in the same way that Churchill strengthened the British during their darkest days of World War II. Of course, Churchill is a cigar smoker. Hindi suwako. Yan ang uso nun. We will fight them in the beaches. We will fight them in the... ganong salita niya. We are going and we shall never surrender. Yan si Churchill. Okay? Here, Netanyahu was talking about their past. He said, at the time we had a country but no army, no powerful air force. But now, he said, we have a country, we have an army, and we have a powerful air force. We have the state-of-the-art economy, which export millions of dollars. A state-of-the-art economy. Why? They are able to make the desert bloom. Yung agriculture nila, grabe, they are now exporters of oranges and flowers around the world. There is no barren desert area in Israel now. Okay, they're able to do that. And Intel and Microsoft and IBM have been developed by them, and many other things. Okay, our doctors, he said, receive awards for medical research. If you are looking for a good doctor, look for an Israelite doctor and go to an Israelite hospital. Advanced yan sila. They're the most advanced, and they have been given Academy Awards it's not Academy Awards, but they have been given awards for most of the researchers. Ang dami lang invento. I think I mentioned this before, that among peoples of this world, the Israelites have the most patent holders among them. Thousands, ang dami. While the Islamic countries, few dozen lang, sila thousands. Okay? And Israel has sent its own satellite into space. They have. Yet it's a small nation. Okay? They sent satellite in space. What else have they accomplished? He said, we are proud to be of the same rank as the United States, which has 250 million inhabitants, 250 million. Russia, which has 200 million inhabitants. China, which has 1.3 billion. Actually, I read the latest statistics last week. It's now 1.41 billion. So it has grown, 1.41 billion. It's not 1.3. Europeans, France, Great Britain, and Germany with 350 million inhabitants. That's in Europe. That's as big as the United States. Okay, but he said Israel is now part of the family of the nuclear powers with nuclear powers of the world. United States, Russia, China, India, France, and Great Britain, pito. Israel has never confirmed this, but he said everyone knows they're a nuclear power. Kaya hindi basta-basta. Okay? At the Dimona complex, they have the nuclear power there. They say that only 60 years ago, we were led ashamed and hopelessly to the slaughter. We have won our wars here, and with less than nothing, we built our little empire from nothing. And sabi ni Netanyahu, who is Hamas to scare me? What was his answer? To terrify me? You make me laugh. Tawa lang siya sa Hamas. Okay. And he has every reason to laugh at Hamas. He said Passover was celebrated. Okay, they celebrated that. Let's not forget what this is about. Why? He said we survived Pharaoh. We survived the Greeks. We survived the Romans. We survived the Inquisition of Spain. We have survived the pogroms in Russia. That's the elimination program. We survived Hitler. We survived the Germans. We survived the Holocaust. We survived the armies of the 7 Arab countries. We survived Saddam. Then, let's face the world. Let us remember, all nations or cultures who tried to destroy us no longer exist today. Totoo yan? The nations, strong powers that try to destroy them no longer exist today. Ano yun? And he said, we still live. Egypt, wala na. Greeks, wala na. It's a world power. Alexander the Macedonian, Alexander the Great, wala na. The Romans, he said, does anyone still speak Latin today? Wala. It's a dead language, Latin. So he's comparing these things. The Third Reich, and look at us, the Bible nation, the slaves of Egypt, who are still here. The ones who were slaves of Egypt, and they still survive to this day. They are called the Bible nation because they believe the commands of Yahweh. They keep the Sabbath, they keep the food laws, and they keep the name of Yahweh. That is their secret. Okay? So, there's something about them. And he said, and we speak the same language to now and then. They all speak Hebrew, Aramaic. And if you read the article, what was the original language? At Eden, the only conclusion is it is Hebrew. The Phoenician, tagal na yan. It is Hebrew. And you have to remember that if you want more proof, you read the articles at Biblical Truths. There are enough evidences to show that. Okay. He said, Arabs don't know yet, but they will learn that there is a God. Not Allah. Okay, Allah is a moon god, and that moon god is not even a god. Okay? As long as we keep our identity, we are forever. So forgive us for not worrying, for not crying, not to be afraid. Things are fine here. They could certainly get better. However, Netanyahu continued to say, don't believe the media. They don't tell you the truth. Okay, the liberal media, oh, kawawa mga Palestinians, inaapi ng Israel. Sino nauna? Sino nag-fire ng 2,000 rockets to Israel? It's the Hamas of the PLO, which declared a terrorist organization. And Israel is simply defending itself, dagapanagang lang. Yet the media is condemning them, the European nations are condemning them, the Arab nations are condemning them, yet they're just defending themselves. Okay. And he said, parties continue to take place, people continue to live, people keep coming out, people continue to see friends. Yes, our morale is low, Okay, medyo malungkot sila. So what? He said, only because we mourn our deaths, while others rejoice in the blood shed. Mga Arabs. And they're very happy that they have fired rockets to Israel. Okay? That is why we will win in the end. He said, the guardian of Israel, Yahweh our God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, never sleeps. Hindi natutulog ang God nila. That's why they are victorious. So he said, forward this letter to the whole community and to the people around the world. Okay, they are part of our strength. Share this to your wall with your friends. This is what Netanyahu said, to bolster the courage of the Israel people when they are under fire from the enemy. Talagang inuulan ng these things. Okay, now, a little bit of the history of this Arab PLO. Okay, PLO was first founded in 1964 in a summit conference in Egypt. Yon, nag-usap yung mga Arab nations, and in 1964 they were organized. Now, what do we understand of PLO? PLO, or the Palestinian Liberation Organization, founded in 1964 in Egypt. The organization's initial goal was to unite various Arab groups and create a liberated Palestine in the land of Israel. So yun, they squatted in the middle of Israel. Okay, over time, the PLO has embraced a broader role, claiming to represent all Palestinians while running the Palestinian National Authority. Although the PLO was known to be violent during the early years, the organization became associated with controversial tactics like terrorism and extremism. That is what PLO is known for. Now, the PLO emerged in response to various compounding events that took place in the Middle East. In 1948, Israel became an independent state, which resulted in more than 750,000 Palestinians fleeing their homeland. In 1948, when the United Nations declared Israel, yung mga Palestinians nag-alisan sila. Kasi Israel was declared a nation. And but as a result of that, yung nagpaiwan, they became violent. Okay? Around this time, Palestinians were spread out among several countries. Actually, this PLO, Palestinians, actually belong to Jordanian, the Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, kung saan-saan. Yung iba nag-uwian, but may nagpaiwan. Matigas sa ulo. Okay. During the Arab League Summit of 1964, Palestinians came together to create one central organization, and it was called the Palestinian National Council, and their goal began to shift. Their goal was to destroy the state of Israel. Yan hangarin nila. Destroy. That is what we are for. We'll destroy Israel. And of course, their first leader, chairman, was Ahmad Shukari. But very soon, it was replaced by the famous Yasser Arafat. Siya naging leader. After the Arab-Israel Six-Day War in 1967, in which Israel emerged victorious, the group known as Fatah, led by military leader Yasser Arafat, started to infiltrate and dominate the organization. So, yang si Yasser Arafat was head of the Fatah organization. That is a terrorist organization on. In 1969, Arafat became chairman of the PLO Executive Committee, holding the title until his death in 2004. So, not too long ago, okay? Starting in the late 1960s, the PLO launched attacks on Israel from the bases in Jordan. Many of them are from Jordan, actually, just the neighboring state. In 1971, the PLO was forced to relocate from Jordan, shifting its headquarters to Lebanon. While in Lebanon, factions within the PLO began to neglect Israel military target attacks and instead carried out terrorism plots, including high-profile bombing and aircraft hijacking. Yan ang plano nila. In 1974, Arafat called for the PLO's attack on targets outside of Israel to stop as part of a plan to gain global acceptance and legitimacy. In October 1974, the Arab League recognized the PLO as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people and granted it full membership. So yung Arab League organization yan. A month later, Arafat became the first non-state leader to address the United Nations General Assembly. Gipa-speech yan si Arafat sa United Nations. Okay. In 1982, the PLO leadership moved its bases to Tunisia, where it remained until it relocated to Gaza in 1994. So from Tunisia, bumalik dun sa Gaza, that western part. And then what replaced this, or what moderated the PLO, was the Oslo Accord. Okay. The first Intifada, a Palestinian uprising against Israel occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, started in 1987 and ended in 1991. This period of bloody conflict triggered a peace process known as the Oslo Accord. You've read that, Oslo Accord. Arafat signed a series of treaties with Israel Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Buhay pa noon. The two leaders were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1994. The first Oslo Accord agreement was signed in 1993 and the second in 1995. The Oslo Accords established the Palestinian National Authority, which functions as an agency of the PLO to govern parts of Gaza and the West Bank. Always remember, dalawa yan. Gaza, yung doon, tabi ng dagat, and the West Bank dito sa near the Jordan. They also created a timetable for Israel to gradually withdraw from key territories. In 1994, Arafat returned to Gaza to head up the Palestinian Authority after being exiled for 27 years. Hindi makapasok sa Israel si Yasser Arafat. But after 27 years, bumalik. Okay. However, peace between Israel and the Palestinians were short-lived. The Second Intifada, another period of bloody conflict, took place from 2000 to 2005. 5 years. Okay. So after that, Hamas takes over. Naging terrorist na. In 2006, a Sunni Islamist militant group called Hamas won the majority in the Palestinian Legislative Council elections. Natalo yung mga conservative, nanalo yung Hamas. Okay. And so, conflict between the Fatah and Hamas led to violence in 2007 when Hamas defeated Fatah in a battle for Gaza. The two Palestinian Authority areas were run by separate factions, with Fatah ruling the West Bank and Hamas ruling Gaza. Noon dalawa pa. In 2014, Hamas and Fatah agreed to a deal which would form a united national Palestinian government. Hamas has a reputation of carrying out terrorist acts. In fact, many countries consider the group to be a terrorist organization. And Hamas has been declared by the U.S. State Department list of terrorist organizations since 1997. Hamas is considered a terrorist organization. So, how about today? PLO today. In 2011, the Palestinian Authority made a bid for full membership state status in the UN. Although UN, United Nations, did not accept it, but it gave them UN General Assembly non-member observer status. Okay, you can attend our meeting, you can observe, you can participate in debates, you can advance resolution, but we cannot give you yet full membership because first, you're not really a state. Okay, yung lugar niyo or territory, hiram lang yan, so we don't know if you last. So they were given temporary observer status. But the important thing to them, they can join debates and pass resolution, which to them were already happy that at least one foot was already inside the United Nations. But one thing is sad. The PLO became a member of the International Criminal Court in 2015. Ginawa silang member sa International Criminal Court nga sila mismo kriminal. That is kind of sad, but that is what United Nations did. Okay, so today, the Palestinian Authority is headed by Mahmoud Abbas. Okay, you have seen his picture, bearded old man. He's the PLO chairman and president of the Palestinian Authority. Okay, Abbas is considered relatively moderate and has voiced opposition to violence in past conflict. Ayaw niyang violence. Okay. PLO's present effort have focused on achieving international recognition. So, habol nila, huwag kayong maggulo masyado para we will be recognized as a decent nation. However, the two-state solution is a controversial plan that Israel Prime Minister and the United States both opposed. What is two-state solution? Ang pinopropose ng Palestinian, yung Israel, okay, is one nation, yung PLO will be another nation. So, bigyan. And that is what Israel's Prime Minister do not like, and that is also what United States do not like. In fact, in 2017, U.S. President Donald Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, generating disapproval among Arabs and other allies. So, President Trump declared Jerusalem as the exclusive capital city of Israel. Disappointed mga Arabs yan. But they cannot do anything because President Trump is very powerful. So, we don't know what Biden will do, whether pero mahirap na yan, baguhin. So that is what we have at present with the PLO headed by Mahmoud Abbas. Okay, it's a little bit moderate now, but with the events last week, we see the violence again. Okay, firing over 2,000 rockets, homemade rockets into Israel territory. Now, of course, we know that there are more casualties in the PLO side, and not only Israel defending itself with their Iron Dome, but they are preparing. I don't know if they are already have mobilized to step into a ground attack on PLO. Soldiers na talagang hindi lang sige pabutulan. Talagang they will go search from house to house, identify the launching pads, destroy the commanders of this Hamas. That is what Israel is doing. And Netanyahu said that I don't think we are going to stop until we have accomplished our goal. Talagang magulo. Okay? Magulo. So, that is where this world stands today. How long it will stop, we don't know. And we know that it will only stop if the Hamas group will stop bombing Israel. But as long as the rockets keep firing into Israel, Israel will keep on defending itself and will do a ground attack. It has destroyed their tunnels. Ang daming tunnels yan. Doon nagtatago. Israel was able to do that. Now, what does prophecy say about these things? Let's open to Zechariah chapter 12. Zechariah chapter 12. Here, the last book of the Old Testament. just before Malachi. Zechariah 12. Starting verse 1, the burden of the word of the Lord, or of Yahweh, against Israel, thus saith Yahweh, who stretches out the heavens, lays the foundation of the earth, and forms the spirit of man within him. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all the surrounding peoples, when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. Okay? And he said, it shall happen in that day that I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone for all peoples. All who would heave it away will surely be cut in pieces, although all nations of the earth are gathered against it. That's a prophecy. So here, Yahweh is saying that every nation that participates in destroying Israel will be cut off, and as if they're heaving a very heavy stone, mabigat. Yes. Okay, which of course includes PLO. So that is a prophecy that shows. But in the later end, what do we read? Let's open to Zechariah chapter 14, just 2 chapters away. In verse 2, starting verse 2, this is another attack against Jerusalem. Ngayon, okay, they are being attacked by nations. Israel has always been attacked by neighboring Arab nations since its independence in 1948, and then in 73 war, and then in 76, and now, of course, this happened also in about 2000, now in 2021. We read in chapter 14, verse 2, and I'll gather all the nations to battle against Jerusalem. Okay? Gather all the nations. Why? The United Nations, pabor yan sa kanila. Ang nag-object lang dyan, sometimes is the US and Britain, Australia, New Zealand. United Nations is puzzled with that. They don't know that these are brothers, descendants of Abraham. Okay? Through Joseph's side. Joseph and of course the sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh. Now, what kind of attack will this be? The city shall be taken, and continue at Zechariah 14. And the city shall be taken, the houses rifled, and the women ravished or raped. Half of the city shall go into captivity, but the remnant of the people shall not be cut off from the city. And the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations, as he fights in the day of battle. And in that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall be split in two, making a very large valley. Half of the mountain shall move toward the north, and half of it toward the south. And of course, it talks about the return of the Messiah to this earth. But this final battle will be accompanied by forces that are divine, powerful, no longer human. And Yeshua will come back to fight, and we are expected to be with him riding in white horses. Enoch prophesied about that. Heavenly invasion on this earth to stop all of this evil that is going on this earth. Now, let us remember something that most people do not realize, and that even the Arab nations don't realize. Let's open to Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 10. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 10. We hope that the Arab nations will realize this, so that it's for their own good. 32:10. What did God say, or Yahweh say about this? In verse 10 it says, okay, Yahweh speaking here, He found him in a desert land and in a wasteland. He's talking about Jerusalem, a howling wilderness. He encircled him, He instructed him, He kept him as the apple of His eye. This God speaking. And when God considers somebody or a nation as the apple of His eye, babantayan niya yan, aalagaan niya yan. And I hope that we will remember that and respect God's dealing with Israel. God said, actually the prophecy in Romans said, yes, a day that Israel will be saved. Meanwhile, how does God look at Israel? Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem. We can find that in Revelation chapter 11, verse 8. Verse 8. How does God, okay, it's the apple of His eye, but right now, how does He look at the city of Jerusalem? Revelation 11, verse 8. And their dead bodies, now this talking about the bodies of the two witnesses. Their bodies will be in the streets of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, in which also our Lord was crucified. Question: where was Christ, Yeshua, crucified? Of course, in the city of Jerusalem. And how does God call that city right now? It's called Sodom and Egypt. Walang pinag-iabay. Those are the two most wicked, most sinful cities in biblical history. So let us not take pride. There are many, or some churches that say, oh, headquarters now in Jerusalem. So what? That's called Sodom and Egypt. Okay? The true Jerusalem will still come. That's why it's being attacked and all of those that will be destroyed until something better will come up. Now, we are near our conclusion here. What is the future of this city? Let's go to Psalm 87, starting verse 1 to 6. Psalm, the future of that city, 87, 1 and 6. Okay, Psalm 87, 1 to 6. What's the future of that city? It says, the heading here in the New King James Version, the glories of the city of God. Okay. He said, His foundation is in the holy mountains, meaning government. Yahweh loves the gates of Zion. Okay, that's an indication of Jerusalem also. More than all the dwellings of Jacob. Okay, more than all the cities of Jacob. Glorious things are spoken of you, O city of God. This is prophetically looking. I will make mention of Rahab and Babylon to those who know me. Behold, O Philistia and Tyre with Ethiopia, this one was born there. Now, Philistines were born in that city of Jerusalem, and the residents of Tyre and Ethiopians, okay, they were born there. And of Zion it will be said, this one and that one were born in her, in that city. Of course, we know the PLO were born there. Generations of PLO were born there. And the Most High Himself shall establish her. And the Yahweh will record when He registers the peoples plural, this one was born there. So Yahweh is fair, is just, okay? You were born in that city, okay? You are entitled to the land of your birth. Yahweh will be fair in that day. Okay, but for now, what is the principle? That Yahweh is exercising. This one great principle which is good for us to realize and to practice. And hopefully, all the Arab nations will know. Let's open to Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. This is the overall principle guiding that nation now. In the future, okay, you will recognize, okay, you were born in Jerusalem, that's okay. But for now, what is the principle that God will apply? Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. He said, I will bless those who bless you. I'll curse him who curses you. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So, right now, PLO, influenced by Hamas ideology, the former Infata ideology, curses Israel. From childhood, they've been trained to hate Israel. And as they grow up, they learn to be rebellious and will fight against Israel. And what did God say? He that curses you will be cursed. And that is why the PLO has not developed as much as Israel to this day. Israel has been touched in medical, agricultural, space, and defense. But PLO, under Hamas rulership, nothing. Very far away. Why? Because they've cursed Israel. And that's the problem. And may people learn to respect and to love Israel so that they also will prosper in the end. Because God's word is sure. He that curses you will be cursed. And he that blesses you will be blessed. And we, as a people, as a group of people, are known to, shall we say, honor Israel. And that is why we are living in relative peace and prosperity. We follow the same laws that God gave to Israel. Okay, the Sabbath, the holidays, the food laws, and the name we call Yahweh and Yeshua. And so we have similarities with them. And by that, we are blessing them. And we expect Yahweh's blessings to be upon us. But those who curse Israel, for now, they are going to be cursed.